This is PTV World. I am Syed Shabahat Ali and you are watching Fault Lines. The fuel prices are rising everywhere in the world. These are affecting economies like that of Pakistan, India, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, as well as the major economies of Europe like England and Spain. In England, there are long queues outside the gas stations. Spain is trying to grapple with the energy crisis. Germany is revisiting its national policy on energy procurement. And China, the manufacturing hub of the world, is facing one of the most acute energy crises of its recent times. But why all of this is happening now when the world economy is recovering from the effects of COVID? What will happen in the near future if the energy crises are not met timely? And how the major economies are going to deal with this issue is going to be the part of my program, the first part of my program. In the second part of my program, I'm going to talk about ICIJ's recent revelations of Pandora Papers. The papers that have brought out the hidden wealth of 35 heads of the state and another 330 eminent personalities from across the world. Why these offshore havens are created, how they can be justified when the world is so badly behind these ill-gotten money quagmires that are affecting economies of the developing countries is the part of my program. Watch the package prepared by my team before I bring my first guest to the program.
To assess the future dynamics of world in coming years, several things need to be pondered, but two substantial recent developments require special reflection. One startling development has been the Pandora Papers, an investigation by biggest media consortium which shone light on wealth allegedly amassed by global elite. The papers published by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists exposed staggering financial holdings of high-profile figures around the world, including dozens of world leaders, hundreds of public officials, media moguls, and powerful businessmen. According to the consortium, the Pandora Papers is its most expensive expose of financial secrecy yet, in terms of data collection and collaboration, even larger than its predecessor, the explosive Panama Papers, which had set off alarm bells across the world. Another considerable global development is precipitation of energy crunch, which is poised to take toll upon world economic order. According to the International Energy Agency, an acute shortage of natural gas, LNG, and coal supplies stemming from the gathering global economic recovery has sparked a precipitous run-up in prices of energy supplies and is triggering a massive switch to oil products. As the world is in grip of energy crisis, oil demand surged by 500,000 barrels per day, stoking inflation and slowing the world's economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, sending power prices surging to record levels as widespread energy shortages hit Asia and Europe. Thus, economic recovery from pandemic was unsustainable and investment in renewable energy needs to triple by the end of the decade.
To join me from London in the first part of this program is my guest Osama Rizvi. He is an expert on energy and environment issues, writes and speaks frequently on these issues. Osama, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
Osama, from 107 US dollar in 2014, we saw the petroleum prices dropping down to $34.5 in 2015. This was a substantial drop. What happened between then and now when we are facing one of the greatest crises of these recent times?
First of all, we need to remember that in 2014, the main cause for this oil price drop was the battle between Saudi Arabia, or OPEC, and the shale producers, or the US. So it was mainly, in short, a battle for the market share. The US, due to technological improvement, technological development, was able to ramp up its production of oil. And Saudi Arabia and the OPEC cartel, of which Saudi Arabia is the de facto leader of, so they were worried about the market share, and they also ramped up the production. So there was a battle between them, and the production kept rising up while the demand wasn't there, and the prices fell. So that was one of the main causes of the fall in oil prices.
And Osama, now when this all is happening, we have heard that OPEC has decided not to increase the supply on short-term basis, which might just trigger more crisis. Tell us about the contribution of OPEC versus non-OPEC countries. How imminent is the contribution of OPEC when it comes to the global fuel prices?
So after the recent price battle that I mentioned, there was a new group that was formed. It is called OPEC Plus, that included uh, other countries than the OPEC oil producing countries and Russia as well. So there are 23 countries in total, and together they contribute to more than 50% of the global oil supplies. They hold between them 90% of the global oil reserves. So you can tell that how much of a power does these countries wield amongst them. And now what has happened is that the opposite has started to happen. The demand has started to go up, whereas the supply isn't there or is not as much as it is required. However, Saudi Arabia and other oil producing countries would love a higher oil price because it helps balance their budget. Saudi Arabia needs $80 oil just to balance their budget, let alone to go into surplus. So that is one of the main reasons the OPEC plus countries have rejected to raise production, because if they raise production, the prices will start to fall down. So that is one of the most imminent dynamic that has stopped them from raising production for the time being. They will do it in the future when it becomes too easy for shale producers to start increasing their production as well. And once again, the question of market share becomes relevant. But up until that point, I think they'll just go with the flow.
Osama, you mentioned these countries having a very critical role when it comes to the production, but as I was going through different, media groups that are sharing news regarding the supply crisis, they are all mentioning the problem of supply chain and logistics. Now, where does this logistics and supply chain issue comes from? Because to my understanding, this is a perfect market. You require oil, you have the money, the countries can give you the oil right away. Why do we have this crisis that is causing this panic in the global market?
Very interesting question, and it is not only about oil at the moment. If you look at the global commodities index by Bloomberg, it has reached 11-year high, one of the highest points from the point it was started. So it is about coffee, it is about wheat, it is about cotton, it is about aluminum, it is about copper, it is about all the commodities in the world. The reason, the reasons are multiple. There is no one reason. Take for example, you mentioned in the introductory package about the gas prices. So the gas production, the domestic gas production in main countries across the globe has fallen slightly every year during the past 10, 15 years. And what has happened now is that we are experiencing a resurgence in demand because we are coming out of COVID-19, almost similar to coming out of a war when everything was stalled. So there is a mismatch between the supply and demand thing. And secondly, there is also the dynamic of shipping containers. So according to one shipping index, the price of shipping containers have risen 350%. So you can imagine, and sales to business inventories are as
Osama,
its
why?
lowest.
I'll stop you here. Why
Yeah.
350%? That's a substantial rise. I mean, what has changed about the shipping industry at all? I mean, if the world was not ready, I mean, for this immediate recovery, there were ships that were dedicated to this job because, you cannot ship anything else in a ship that is dedicated for the oil product. So tell us more about it. This sounds very interesting.
Yeah, so you can appreciate, the shipping industry, the ship itself is not a push start thing. There has to be a lot of procedure. There has to be a lot of technical handling and all these stuff. But there was no time to do that, and the demand resurged very fastly. Two of the U.S. biggest ports, one of them is Los Angeles. There is a I was reading, there is a line of containers as stretched as far as as the eye can see, about 70 to 72, 4 times more than the usual. So it's very basic. It's just that the producers, the manufacturers, are not able to keep up with the orders. So the ships are just continuing to accumulate at ports across the globe, and they're going back. There is all sorts of traffic in the maritime roads as we speak right now, and hence the subsequent crisis that we're living through. It's all about
Osama,
supply and demand.
Osama, you write on these issues very frequently. So, in your personal analysis, how long do you see these crises to prevail in the global market?
I think it will get worse before it gets better. It has only started. All the companies across the globe, Nestle and IKEA and others, they have started issuing statements on record that we should prepare for more price hikes as we move into the next year. So I think it will take at least 1 year for things to return back to normalcy. You will see the effects of this uh, prevalent all over the world, as we are seeing right now in Pakistan, where petrol prices were increased by 10 rupees once again. And I think people should be prepared for that. This is going to continue to happen until it settles down.
Thank you very much, Osama, for being guest in my program. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join back with the second segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back. To join me in the second segment of the program is Ali Murtaza. He is Regional Vice President of MOL Group for Middle East, Africa, and Pakistan. Ali is an eminent professional of the petroleum industry in Pakistan, and we are very grateful for having him in our program. Ali, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Ali, the crisis in Pakistan has just started. We are seeing petroleum prices going high day by day. And we were just discussing in the first segment of the program with another guest that there is some international linkage of it within the international market. How do you see that, Ali?
Well, for any country that does not have enough indigenous production of either oil and gas, they are always dependent, and this is really something that is interconnected. I was listening to the first portion of your program, and it was very enlightening. But what we need to understand is that what is happening in the international arena in oil and gas, or the upstream sector, as we like to see. What is happening is that the world is coming out of a major pandemic. And as a result of this, the industries and everything, the factories, they are opening up. So now there starts to, I mean, a gap sort of starts in the demand and supply of both oil and gas, or even coal for that matter, LNG. So what the international world is saying is that this is basically what we call a commodity super cycle. So basically, what's happening is that all of a sudden, as I mentioned, there is now acute demand of all these products. And Pakistan, because we import about one-fourth of our oil from abroad and a substantial amount of gas in the form of LNG, we are highly dependent on the international scenario. And hence the reason why we see these shortages. You see the queues even in a country like England, You see the gas prices at record high gas prices in Europe, and Russia is trying their best to deal with the situation by increasing the supply. So this is really what is happening in the international arena.
Ali, is it only restricted to the consumption of petrol and diesel, or is it also going to affect Pakistan's natural gas production? Because I was reading one of the articles in a newspaper, and it says that Pakistan will have one of the worst crises of natural gas in this year. Your comments on it?
Well, we do have, I must say, I mean, if you look at some of the partner companies that we have, we do have some very good professional leading these. But what is unfortunate is that the gas production and oil production is depleting in Pakistan. And that has to be met up with import of LNG. As the worthy minister mentioned the other day, that the depletion of gas is approximately 9%. So obviously this is going to impact Pakistan. And as I said, if you look at the international arena, what is happening? You look at the situation of oil. It's now touching one of the highest rates in a very long time, since 2014. We haven't had this kind of Brent price, which is approximately $85. Why is that happening? As I explained, there's an acute shortage now, or a gap, which is widening between what is being produced. Your other guest mentioned the OPEC. They are trying to increase the production, and they intend to increase it by 2.7 million barrels a day. But even if they do this till the end of the year or mid-year next year, the shortage in the international market that you're looking at is approximately 700,000 barrels of oil a day. So that's considerable. And if this, as I said, has an effect on everything, right? So because the oil price is, because the gas price is so high, LNG is very high, that's putting more pressure on oil. More countries are importing oil. And then, as I said, it's really a domino effect that's happening throughout the international market. And as I said, Pakistan is linked to all of this. So that's one of the reasons. Then you, of course, have the FX fluctuation, which is the parity between the dollar and the rupee, which adds to this entire supply chain or domino effect, as I said.
So, Ali, if I understand you correctly, will this take us back again to the more expensive options like furnace oil, like coal that have environmental hazards as well associated with it? Do we have the capacity to switch the fuels at the moment when it comes to the power generation,
I mean, look, as I mentioned earlier, I think there are a couple of incidents which are, again, international, but we do have an effect on Pakistan. I already mentioned OPEC is considering increasing. They've already announced that they would be increasing their production. But there are other incidents, for example, Hurricane Ida in the US, which has impacted the US export of shale. Once this starts coming or flooding the market, you will obviously then see a series of, I would say, price stabilizations. But as I said, until there is a gap, we'll have to continue suffering. Unfortunately. Look at the spot price of LNG. I mean, in the UK, I believe it was a couple of days ago, it was approximately $30 per MBTU. Look at the Japan LNG spot price, it's $32. And this is very, very high. I mean, in Asia, the market actually touched $56 the other day. And as a result, as I said, this is going to be difficult for the Pakistani economy. It's a very challenging situation. And I think the government is trying their level best to deal with the scenario.
So, Ali, given all this situation, how do you see our economy to progress? Because we are still coming out of the crisis that are created by this COVID pandemic, and now we are into this another bigger problem, perhaps. So, do you see our economy having the capacity to come out of these fuel crises that you have just underlined?
Well, look at the global economy to start off with. I'll start with that. The global economy was increasing at a rate of about 2.4 to 3% since 2014. After the pandemic has started to subside, the international level is unbelievably 5.9%, and it is expected to go down to about 4.5 or 4.6% next year. I think Pakistan, again, is in the same scenario that our local industry is now beginning to ramp up production. workers are returning to the factories. So there's going to be the demand of oil. Now, in your previous question, which I had missed out on, was you mentioned very rightly that do we go back to furnace oil and coal? Even countries like China have no choice but to go back to coal and start increasing their coal production, power production from coal. So I don't think that we'll be able, I mean, this is my own opinion, I don't think we'll be able to come out of this crisis without having to start up our fossil fuel plants, such as the ones that used to run on furnace oil. I think we don't have a choice. This has probably caught up with us, and we have to deal with the situation at hand in order to make sure that our factories are up and running. And obviously that then has an effect on the employees, on the products. Many of these factories, I'm sure, have export orders that they need to meet. Otherwise, they'd have to pay very high damages charges or for missing the deadlines.
Thank you very much, Ali, for being guest in my program. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join back with the last segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back. And as I said in the introduction of the program, the second part of the program is dedicated to the revelations of ICIJ, which we call Pandora Papers, in which 35 head of the states and 330 eminent personalities from around the world have been found putting their money in these tax havens that have now become a problem for all the developing countries. I have a strong guest lineup for this session. Over the Skype, I have with me Barrister Asad Rahim Khan. He's a writer, a columnist, and a legal expert. We're going to talk with him about the problem and the legal front of this issue. And in the studio, I have with me Mr. Javed Khan Jadoon. He is editor-in-chief of Pakistan Perspective and a leading journalist covering this issue. I'll start from you, Barrister Asad. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Barrister Asad, before we talk about Pandora in specific, tell us what is this ICIJ and how much can we rely on the findings made by this organization?
So the ICIJ is the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and they rely on a global network of investigative reporters and white-collar crime experts. We can rely on them to the extent that there haven't been major refutations of what their previous reporting has been. Whether you look at this from 2016, during the Panama paper leaks, all the way to 2021, with the Pandora paper leaks. The core objective of the ICIJ is to bring to attention the global tax avoidance that is being done by international elites, to the extent that it is tax evasion, it is money laundering, it is white collar fraud. And to a great extent, they have succeeded. They say that they rely on authentic sources, they rely on authentic leaks of law firm documents, and as mentioned earlier, there hasn't been a major rebuttal of their investigative reporting thus far.
Barrister Asad, when we talk about this issue, we see it coming very frequently that these safe havens are providing patronage, they are providing support, they are providing safe havens to the ill-gotten money from the developing countries primarily. Now, since most of this money is supposedly, because it's been hidden from the country or the source of its origin is perhaps an ill-gotten money to begin with, why do not we have an international legal system that can catch hold of these people and can force these banks to take this money back to the country of origin?
Well, so that's a very good question. Firstly, you find that very many offshore havens are more or less in the Western Hemisphere. So there are vested interests. There are very many European capitals that are actually banking on money that is of dubious origin to continue floating their economies along. So to ask for a very ambitious cross-border international legal mechanism, it's reporting like the ICIJ's that has pushed the conversation in that direction. Unfortunately, we are finding two rather negative entities in tandem. One is elites in developing countries that are funneling their money to these offshore havens. The other is offshore havens themselves premising keeping that money on rules of complete non-transparency, rules that they don't have to divulge, and a completely opaque internal mechanism. So until we actually have to put some emphasis on cross-border linkages, creating international institutions that actually look at both sides with in equal measure, I am afraid that right now the balance of power is tilted far towards these neoliberal institutions that facilitate these safe havens. And I say that with great regret.
Javed Sahab, you have a great insight of these issues. You observe these issues very keenly. What is your take on having these safe havens in the Western Hemisphere where the people, where the elites, where the head of the states, where the politicians, where the crop businessmen are piling up their assets and they are beyond anybody's control?
Thank you very much. I think absolutely, because we know that most of the developing countries, the rulers, the politicians, the former rulers and the current rulers as well, as been reported by the ICIJ that more than 300 politicians, some former and even current rulers have been found to be involved in the operation of offshore safe havens. Why they do that? The big question is what is behind creating an offshore company. I think there's nothing wrong or nothing illegal about having an offshore company. What is wrong is when you you get the fraudulent practices being done in the developing countries, money is being laundered, and safe havens found to even evade taxes, etc. That is the objectionable part of the operation of the safe havens or the offshore companies. 300 politicians from 90 countries have been found to be involved in this. As you earlier you were asking about the authenticity of the papers. I think the papers are authentic in the sense that they were released. 11.9 million papers were released by 14 service providers. What this consortium did, along with the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, and with the assistance of journalists from 117 countries, what they did, they vetted the documents, and because you can see the massive number of papers were leaked by the 14 service providers. 11.9 million papers is a massive amount of information coming out. So what they did, they basically vetted the whole information. They basically tried to find out, like now we have the number of people, important people like the King of Jordan, the President of Russia, and some of the princes in England and so on and so forth, and even politicians from Pakistan.
We have Tony Blair in the list.
Heads of the some of the media houses.
Yeah, we have Tony Blair. We have
Tony
the
Blair has
Ukrainian president.
Ukrainian president, etc. So I think,
on.
as far as authenticity is concerned, there is absolutely no doubt in that. I think there's not a single individual, important or less important or not important. They haven't denied their involvement in creating offshore companies. They haven't denied, but what they said was that, well, nothing illegal was being done. So now, I mean, let us differentiate between what is being done in the developed democracies and the developing democracies. In the developed democracies, the system comes into action automatically. You don't have to issue directives and orders to the respective institutions to carry out the investigation when such leaks are made public. But unfortunately, in developing democracies like ours, you have to issue certain orders and then you sort of establish certain TORs for the investigative agencies.
Well, that reminds me that Prime Minister had said there is going to be a commission, there's going to be an inquiry, a formal inquiry into this matter. What has happened on that front?
This is exactly what I'm saying. You don't have to create any independent authority or commission, because in developed democracies, you have institutions already operating. They come into force, they even investigate the sitting presidents and the prime ministers. But unfortunately, as I said, in developing democracies, this is what happens when the government has to intervene. They have to create certain authority, or they have to create certain investigative mechanism to find out. Now we know that about 700 persons or entities are involved in the offshore companies. So why there's a delay? Including, we know that there's certain government functionaries. Of course, I think it is possible even some of the ministers, former ministers in Sindh government as well, and businessmen and
so it has to be looked into in a professional manner.
My point is there should be and ought to be inherent system of checks and balances. And if something like the Pandora box leaks takes place, the system has to come into action automatically and must start digging into the details, because now what they have to find is whether the money was ill-gotten, whether the money was laundered from Pakistan or not. I mean, each and every individual is trying to protect or rather secure himself by saying that, well, this money wasn't laundered. So I think ultimately the investigative agencies or the institution,
let's bring Barrister
Asad
back into the conversation. Barrister Saab, have there been any major steps taken elsewhere in the world, because there are politicians, there are important, eminent people from different walks of life involved? So apart from Pakistan, I mean, if we talk about it internationally, have any steps been taken in some other countries to expedite or to investigate into these leaks, or is it just taken as a news item everywhere?
As you rightly mentioned, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, former Prime Minister's conviction, you had leaders of Iceland, leaders in Malta having to step down because of the public outcry that resulted from the previous Panama leaks. It remains to be seen what Pandora is going to cause. In the United States, you had some very muscular anti-money laundering and anti-corruption legislation being passed as a result of ICIJ leaks. You also had, as we mentioned before, more emphasis on creating international mechanisms to speed this ahead. I would still say, though, that within the realm of Pakistan, not much has been done. We saw that even with regards to Panama, besides the Prime Minister's family, the hundreds of people that were named, many of them Pakistan's political elites, the FBR, the SECP, the National Accountability Bureau, those line institutions that should, as Mr. Jadoon rightly said, have gone into some sort of gear to try and figure this out. They have been as redundant as we saw previously. There is a reason, as you rightly mentioned, sir, that people like Tony Blair have been implicated. Mr. Blair pressed himself into the service of the world's worst blood-splattered dictators. And there is also an ancillary reason that we now find that he's being linked to offshore havens. I agree with Mr. Jadoon that when you have certain offshore havens, Pakistan's legal mechanism does not expressly prohibit it. But there's two things that are happening at the same time. The first, it is a vote of no confidence within Pakistan's existing financial setup that you are parking your assets abroad. That's number one. Number two, the extent of your criminality has never actually been thrashed out because these institutions have not investigated you to the extent that they should have. So we can look at the example of Iceland and Malta and Pakistan. We still have many more steps to take. And I fear that we shouldn't really be banking on or waiting for an international consensus. Right here in Pakistan, we need to take steps that addresses this critical imbalance within our political elites, military
Barrister
elites.
Asad, there is one important legal point in it that I want your expertise on. We're talking about FATF now. FATF is trying to make sure that the money laundering doesn't take place from the developing countries so that it does not finance terrorism elsewhere. Now, FATF is trying to financially strangulate these economies that are actually becoming, that are affected broadly and primarily because of these bad practices by their leaders or their eminent political personalities. On the contrary, we have these safe havens in the West which are not on the radar of FATF, which have most of these monies from the ill-gotten ways. Why the international financial regulatory mechanism, I'm not talking about politics, regulatory mechanism is not taking care of this issue which is now rising again and again and making, headlines in all major media industry?
Well, sir, since it's a privilege to be on your program, I hope you'll also allow me to be able to say that the Financial Action Task Force is a complete and utter charade. To think that it is actually trying to regulate Pakistan's financial sector and restrict access to terrorism, which is what it purportedly tries to do, one would first need to point a finger at the sea of money launderers that make up FATF's actual principal countries. We don't need to name them for reasons that everyone knows. The other point is that if FATF's designated goal is to reduce financial networks, the access to financial networks for terrorists, the actual point is that militant organizations, globally designated terrorist organizations, do not use conventional banking channels in the first place. And this reveals what FATF has been about from day one. It is an instrument of political coercion. It does not seek to fix Pakistan. It does not seek to improve Pakistan's financial streams. It is only a tool of coercion. And I fear that emphasis by FATF to regulate and strangulate our own state bank policies is actually pushing Pakistan into a ditch when our current economic crisis demands that we need to reach out to these institutions, we need to secure financing, and we need to get out of FATF's clutches as fast as we can. So I would say that you are absolutely right. FATF is not going to look at global money laundering, global white-collar crimes, political and military elites stowing away their ill-gotten cash, because their function is a political one, and that function is coercion.
Jitendra Sahab, your quick comments on the same question.
I think it is quite obvious that the international financial system is basically the beneficiary because of these safe havens. They understand that a lot of ill-gotten money is being laundered from third world countries into the financial system of the West. So Western financial system is primarily the beneficiary of it. So that is why what you're talking about, why this international regulatory system is not there to stem this issue. Which is basically stems from corruption and corrupt practices in the developing world. Mostly, I think we believe that, when you look into the examples, you would understand that how organized these mafias are in the developing world. They literally they fleece the people, respective countries, and they launder the money into the safe havens, and then they go for the purchase of the property and luxury goods over there while remaining anonymous. I think that is the kind of security they would like to have, and they have got that. But it is now the primary responsibility of the respective countries and the governments as well to dig deep into it, into these rackets, what is happening in Pakistan's perspective. I think whatever mechanism you would like to have, you have it, and you must start investigating the 700 people who have been named in Pandora box, and more than 440 people named in Panama leaks as well. So until and unless we go for a holistic approach, holistic strategy, we really can't stem the bad practices as far as the countries like Pakistan are concerned.
Javed Sahab, how Pakistan should be addressing this issue, because the current government have this very highly set on its political agenda as well. And now this second, Pandora is the second addition to the same story. So how do you believe government should be responding to it now?
I think as far as Prime Minister Imran Khan is concerned, the PTI government is concerned, their main sort of policy plank was to stem the corrupt practices. Prime Minister Imran Khan has been campaigning against corruption in Pakistan, and he has come into power because of his this particular slogan of countering corruption in Pakistan and rooting out corruption in Pakistan. So I think inherently Prime Minister is responsible to deliver as well, because his government is primarily seen to be a clean government. Prime Minister himself has not been involved in any kind of any kind of scandals. Even his name is not there. So many other world leaders have been named in that. So I think he is in a position right now. He is in a position because of his high moral ground. The Prime Minister can do it, but only if he has the kind of focus which is required. This is going to be a massive exercise. It is not going to be an exercise spread over 7 days or 15 days. It should be and ought to be and sort of necessarily be a very continuous exercise. Ultimately, I think you can do that. While we know that, at least now we can go after the 700 people already named in Pandora Papers. If we start with the 700 people, we deliver the results, I think that would be a kind of a message to wannabe money launderers that, well, if you do that, you will be caught and you will be held accountable as well.
Thank you very much, Javed Sahab, and thank you very much, my other guest barrister, Asad Rahim Khan, for being on my show. Ladies and gentlemen, the Pandora Papers have opened the Pandora box for the money launderers. It is now on the government to take concrete steps to make sure that the money is not laundered outside Pakistan. The money belongs to the people of this country, should stay in this country. We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.